All right, folks, welcome to Lions Den 2021. In the interest of time, we're going to just jump on in and late joiners can just join us where we are. We've got a packed schedule today of some very exciting presentations. I'm Kristen Rising. I am faculty at Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia. I will mostly be just behind the scenes kind of helping to keep track of time, not one of the main events today. So for Lions Den, we have got 5 lions here. For any of you who haven't been here before, this is our takeoff or spinoff of kind of Shark Tank, for those of you who have watched that before. So we've got 5 lions today who have joined us, who I'll introduce in just a moment, who are going to be giving some feedback on each of 4 presentations that we hear, offering advice, offering maybe hopefully some assistance, some mentorship or other buy-in for ones that they're particularly intrigued by. To run through them quickly here, first we have Brendan Carr. He, for those of you who don't know him, is professor and system chair of emergency medicine at Mount Sinai Health System. His core work focuses on understanding the underlying drivers of variability in health outcomes and developing novel approaches to align incentives in order to improve health. Next, we've got Gail D'Onofrio. She is professor of emergency medicine and the inaugural chair of the Department of Emergency Medicine at Yale School of Medicine and physician-in-chief of emergency services at Yale New Haven Hospital emergency departments. She's also professor in the School of Public Health in the Department of Chronic Disease Epidemiology and is boarded in emergency and addiction medicine. She's internationally known for her work in alcohol and other substance use disorders, as well as her research on gender variations in women with ischemic heart disease. Megan Rainey here is director of the Brown Lifespan Center for Digital Health, associate dean of strategy and innovation at the School of Public Health as well at Brown University. Her federally funded research focuses on developing, testing, and disseminating digital health interventions to prevent violence and mental illness. Sorry, I skipped, definitely not meant to be skipped here. Dr. Nate Cooperman, many of you may have seen him as part of a keynote of this conference this year. Dr. Cooperman is a nationally recognized expert in pediatric emergency medicine. He's chair in the Department of Emergency Medicine at UC Davis, an elected member of the National Academy of Medicine, principal investigator of the Pediatric Emergency Care Applied Research Network, and he chairs the executive committee of the Global Pediatric Emergency Research Network. And finally, last but not least, is Manish Shah. He's professor in the Department of Emergency Medicine at the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health, where he also serves as vice chair of research and as co-lead of the Care Research Core at the University of Wisconsin Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. His research focuses on improving acute illness care for older adults with a specific focus on developing and testing innovative models of care for acutely ill older adults. So these will be our 5 lions today. These were our 4 presenters. They will, within their presentations, give as much or little intro to them as needed. That will be part of their time. We have roughly 10 minutes per presenter. So the presenters have been asked to present for anywhere between 3 to 5 minutes, and the remaining time out to 10 minutes will be allocated to the Lions to kind of banter back and forth as much as we can in this virtual space. This is our first virtual round at Lions Den. And so with that, I am going to ask Anish Agarwal to take over the screen share here as our first presenter.
Okay, and Kristen, can you just confirm that you can see that?
Yes, we can see that.
Awesome. Well, it's great to be here. I know many of the people here, but for those of you I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Anish Agarwal. I am faculty here at Penn. And I'll say, I've known Brendan Carr for too long, and I'll try to talk as fast as him, but I'm still working on talking that fast. I'm going to talk about how we can reimagine mental health support for us. I think for too long, emergency medicine has been known as the leaders in burnout and the leaders in being cynics and jaded, a jaded field. And I think it's time that we reimagine that. Why am I here and what am I asking the Lions here for? 3 distinct things. Support. So I'm looking to dive into this topic across sites. Leadership, both from a research perspective and mentorship perspective, but also from like buy-in. I think that mental health, mental illness, mental disorders are a hard thing to talk about. And I think that when leaders normalize the conversation, it becomes much more approachable. And the last thing is risk. I need you all to take a risk on me. I'm going to talk about some innovations, and I think innovations inherently involve risk. And I'm going to ask you for a little bit of a leap in supporting me. We all know that mental health strain and burnout in emergency medicine impacts everyone. I think one life lost is too many. And I would argue that we need to be not just physician centric, we need to be clinician centric, that the mental health of the people in our emergency rooms affects the team aspect, it affects our patients and systems and the trainees. What I will start with is actually, so my family's from India. It's terrible there right now. And 10 or 12 days ago, I had a WhatsApp message from my cousin who's a physician in Delhi. He is my age, and he told me that my 55-year-old cousin was on BiPAP and was struggling to survive. My younger cousin was taking care of his father and handing off care to his wife, who would be the nighttime sort of ICU inpatient doc. Meanwhile, they were also taking care of my two other family members. So the mom, the dad, and a brother were all sick. They had gotten a first dose of the vaccine, but it's a terrible disease and a terrible process. I struggled with I spent the week thinking about how to support him, how to send him all of the recommendations, and essentially co-managing from here in Philly to downtown Delhi, and realizing that I was really wrestling with this. Like, here I could in Philly potentially go for a run without a mask on outside, but my cousin was trying to help his father survive terrible COVID across the country. And I didn't really know what to feel. My cousin did pass away 3 or 4 days ago, and that's been hard. And it's been hard for a lot of reasons. And one of the reasons I think it's been really hard for me is this is something I tweeted out in November. And I realized that I was going through some PTSD when I was talking to my cousin and trying to co-manage a family member's life. And I remember sort of being in this room very vividly, and we've all probably been in a room like this in the past year or so, where I thought I had processed it, but I did not. And I think that the current approaches and how we think about mental health for our team members are just outdated. I recently was on shift, and someone said, "Hey, Nish, this once a year survey we do on burnout, this once a year assessment of my well-being is not enough. If you really want to know the pulse around the department, we need to reach people in the environment. We need to know how people are feeling now, so that we can proactively identify problems and address them early." My pitch to you is I think that in a digital era, we can build systems that follow clinicians throughout their life to understand how they're feeling, where the pain points are, and to react and proactively identify those at risk. Many institutions, I know of many of the people that are here on the panel, have great well-being mental health resources and platforms that are actually very remote and digital. There's a lot of barriers to jumping into that world. And I think that we can lower those barriers by reaching clinicians through digital methods to proactively identify strain, to react to and connect individuals early. And this could essentially work towards a model where health systems can, in de-identified ways, know the strain that their workforce is facing to not only mitigate burnout, but also promote well-being early. I'm going to stop there and would love thoughts and input. How do I do with time?
Just over 5. So Lyons, you have about 5 minutes to discuss.
So, hey, Anish, this is Nate. Nice job. And I guess since we don't have a lot of time, I'll just chime in. Love the thoughts, but my question for you is, what's the ask? It's a really, I like the global concept, but for me to give you money, I need to know what the ask is, and I want to make sure that you got good mentorship and you have somebody on board who knows what they're doing in the digital world. So how about that for a start?
Yeah, I'll go back to my ask is, I think I need support from multiple centers. If I do this at my shop alone, that only tells me about my shop. I think the strain's facing like multiple centers. So resources across sites, so maybe buy-in from different sites, but also leadership and support. I will be honest, I am pivoting hard into mental health. I haven't been in this space before, but I'm really passionate about it now. And I think I have the research chops from completing a fellowship in the clinical scholars program to lead it. But mental health is sort of an unknown box to me. I'm willing to open that box. So mentorship and collaboration across sites.
Can you just tell me again what the research question is?
Can we be proactive and identify mental health disorders early?
So really the research question is, are you trying to develop some type of tool? That's not really a research question. That's like an implication, right? Or an objective, right? Of what you want to do. So is the question that you want to develop, can you develop some kind of tool to identify issues and then figure out how to intervene? I'm still not, I mean, obviously it's very traumatic. I'm still getting over your, your initial issue when you talked about your family. It's unimaginable. But I'm trying to figure out what exactly the research question is and how you're going to measure that question. It's more of a global objective than a question, a research question. So you'd have to have the research question identified, how you would measure that question, how you'd measure that, and whether or not you are doing a surveillance, or are you doing an intervention, or are you trying to do the surveillance first and then lead to something else down the road. It's unclear to me.
Yeah, I'm going to piggy off of you, Gail. So first of all, obviously, if you would come to Brown, we would take care of all of this, but too bad, you're still at Penn, which lessens our ability to do in-person mentoring. But seriously though, I do think that kind of this question of what is a predictive model for who's going to develop either PTSD or burnout, this is stuff that folks are doing in the non-medical space. There are a lot of folks doing digital phenotyping, social media. Obviously you work with Raina. There are a lot of folks doing the social media phenotyping as well. And so I would ground it deeply in that. I feel like moving to multi-center before you have that basic framework down, and Nate's our king of decision rules here. But you need to have kind of your basic, you need to do your initial development before you start kind of going multi-center and trying to gather data from a gazillion people across the country. And then I'm with Gail around kind of clarifying about what that question is. Kristen asks, are we ready to make any offer? I'm of course happy to have a phone call and have a chat and see if we can help narrow it down. But Brendan and Manish have not talked either.
We don't have much time, but I guess I'm going to piggyback off of Megan's, which is, do you actually have an audience for this, right? So like, if you're thinking you're going to get to the clinicians with this surveillance piece, are there people out there that are actually going to want to be surveilled? Is that a verb? I don't know. Are there people that are going to want to respond or participate in this, given all the risks and other things that would entail? And so I guess I'm a little skeptical that the foundational stuff needs to be done to figure out if there's really a spot for this.
And I'll close out by going the opposite direction and saying, I'm all in. What I heard was that you wanted to be a cultural change agent here, that you think that the EM mental health portfolio is not robust enough, and that you have a voice that needs to be heard here. So, my offer would be that our group here that ran the sort of the in partnership with Apple, the Warrior Watch project, and has been tracking all kinds of stuff around people in the healthcare, they're delivering care, and the predictive analytic tools. I will happily, follow up with you, a conversation, an introduction with them. Maybe some of their preliminary data allows you to sort of tighten up some of the pieces that other people were talking about. And then someday, yeah, of course, when this is multi-center and when you need other people to stand next to you and say, this is an enormous thing that we're not paying attention to, we need to pay better attention, I will stand next to you.
Anish, can I just say one last thing on that, is that you've got great resource there that Megan already said with Raina is right there with you. So I'm assuming you'll work off some of her expertise. And once you kind of build your idea and do a little bit of pilot work around it, then you can sort of start bringing other people on board and whatnot. But all of us are happy to help you in any way. So just reach out.
And I could send you some articles that have been published over COVID, just like this, identifying they're around EDs and hospital personnel that have been published from both School of Management and us here in the EM field, as well as psychiatry here at Yale. And I could send you some of those articles that may be helpful to you. And there's survey instruments. And anyway, I'll send it to you.
All right. Awesome. So it sounds like you've got a lot of offers, Anish and Brendan, all in here. So we're going to quickly pivot to Dr. Love here for our next presentation. It's all yours, Jen.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I am very excited to talk to you about my project today, which is called Early Detection of Novel Substances of Misuse Using Social Media. So I think our audience would agree that our pack of research lions is a stately, well-groomed bunch. And being that you're all very glamorous and regal, I imagine that you've made the occasional appointment to get your teeth cleaned and your hair groomed. But I doubt that you remember this manicure routine because you likely received carfentanil to get it all done. To jog your memory, carfentanil is a fentanyl analog commonly used in veterinary medicine. And it, along with other fentanyl analogs, are being increasingly described in emergency medicine and addiction medicine communities. In 2019, fentanyl was the 5th most detected drug by the National Forensic DEA Lab. Our current method of detection of these novel substances of misuse requires the patient to arrive at the hospital with a clinically significant toxidrome that raises concern by the ED clinical team. If the patient can provide urine or blood samples, these are then sent to a specialized GCMS lab for testing, and novel substances are reported back to the team several weeks later. Using this model of detection, research has revealed interesting and critical results about the regionalization of fentanyl and its analogs, and the profile of substances being used in different areas of the United States. This work is currently being led by Dr. Alex Manini at Mount Sinai. But can we track the emergence of novel substances before the patient arrives at the hospital? Can we identify new substances of misuse or contaminants before the patient experiences an overdose requiring medical care, possibly when he or she is at home or on the internet? Enter Reddit. Reddit is an online network of users with similar interests. Reddit users can engage in conversations, answer questions, or offer advice within these online communities anonymously or under a selected identifying name. Patterns of misuse have been identified in web-based communities. Take loperamide, for example. Online users were chatting about non-medical use of loperamide before clinical reports and publications. A study by a team from Wright State University highlighted web-based descriptions of loperamide for opioid withdrawal treatment beginning in 2010 and 2011. Later, in 2014 and 2015, is when we started seeing cardiac toxicity associated with massive loperamide ingestions and increased loperamide misuse case reporting. So the pitch? Can we use social media data sources and natural language processing to detect and understand the emergence of novel drugs of abuse among patients? First, we want to understand what are these substances and where are they located? How are different areas of the country experiencing different patterns of substance misuse? Next, do the substances reported on social media correlate with substances being detected in biomonitoring databases through the DEA or national toxicology organizations? And finally, who are the users who described early use of novel substances? What are their use patterns and the identified risks that they've named? The request from you guys, I have 2 questions. First, are there any national clinical emergency medicine-based data sets that we can tie into our social media data and our laboratory data? And second, if we detect a signal, how can we create and study an early warning system for prevention? Much like the antibiogram for antibiotic stewardship that we all use, can we develop a toxogram that can be accessed in real time by ED clinicians using data from both types of surveillance studies? That's my team, and that's all I've got.
Great. Lyons, it's on to you. And we've got plenty of time. That was not even 4 minutes. So 6 to 7 minutes of chat here.
Okay, I'll
Kick it
start.
off. Oh, go ahead.
Right. Since I have a lot of interest, obviously, in this area. So a lot of people have done this, so that you know there are big systematic reviews in the Journal of Public Health on this worldwide about using social media to try to find out what drugs are using for surveillances. There are a lot of problems with them because they're interpreting what they are and then getting them back to the sites and then figuring out how to do prevention. They clearly, though, could identify things that are happening in the area. But unfortunately, the biggest problem, and it's great to do it and try to see if you can figure it out like you did with loperamide. But the problem is, like for fentanyl right now, we have so many different analogs that are being made and produced on every second. You would never be able to find those. The only people who can do those are at labs that we're sending them to right now as part of ED Innovation at 30 sites. There are labs that can just do that. And by the time I get these samples to the lab, there's going to be a different analog, right? So it's very hard to do it. I think there are no real big databases that I can tell you because they're all behind. That's the problem. And we are trying to do active surveillance. That's why we have 30 sites around the country. It would be nice to have lots of sites around the country who are constantly looking for these medications or drugs, because some of them are prescribed, obviously, and some of them are not prescribed. But I can't think of one thing now. I'd be happy to talk to you about how you could try to do certain things, but we already know. We know exactly around the country where certain drugs are coming out of. What we don't know is those analogs and why they're certainly like they are, right? We know that the fentanyl in Philadelphia and here in New Haven is much different than what it is in California. We know that the amphetamine type substances are much different on the West Coast than here, but it's really hard to pin those down. It takes really a lot of money. It takes a lot of money to run these exams. So that's what you're stuck with. But it would certainly be interesting to see what you could find through your sources and see if we can coordinate with what we're seeing in certain EDs around the country.
So I'm going to maybe look at this from a little bit of a different side than Gail did, which is, I think the informatics component of this is one that everyone's looking at, right? I mean, this is what Google does. This is what everyone's playing with. Can you use NLP out of Twitter, out of whatever? And, we've been doing it for flu. Over here, we're doing it around some of the COVID stuff to get early notification from pulling the text out of the EHR. I think that the question I would almost encourage you to look at, that I'm happy to help with, is, can you make this a pure informatics piece? And then exactly what are you looking for and what do you want to do? So if this is you want to see the latest bad batch of heroin that's come in town, so that our usual way of identifying it, which is EMS brings a couple in, and then I talk to the guy in the next shift going, hey, I saw 2. And he's like, oh, I saw 2 yesterday. Turns into hey, we've had a Delta spike and now we are going to do something. This was what we did post 9/11 to find anthrax, which we never really found. To me, that's actually the really exciting part of this. And what can you do pulling out of Epic? Because if you use Epic's cloud processing service, there's a huge option there.
Hey, Jennifer,
go ahead, Nate.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
No, okay, so I was going to say I'm with Manish that to me the interest is, I think there is this, you have your Reddit database. I think that you can monitor for kind of emerging things that are being discussed, super interesting in and of itself. But to me, it is this early warning system. How do you integrate it in? Do you make it part of like CDC's like Essence program where they're doing ED surveillance using our ED data, right, in a totally anonymized way? Or is it about working with individual EDs? I suspect it's more of the former than the latter. And then that's DOH or you know, you could start with like a local DOH connection, and there are CDC grants constantly around new uses of Essence data. Of course, also think Gail's CTN is a great source of data around substance use patterns around the country, not to offer her. But I think Manisha's point about the informatics side of it is where I would go. I think the Reddit stuff is cool and is like really important. And from a kind of big picture, I love that you're doing it. But for the next steps for this, I would start thinking about that intervention development. And then you also have to think about all those methods around how do you evaluate this type of thing? Like, how do you evaluate changes in behavior or knowledge? And it gets really complicated. And there's some really interesting stuff going on in the health services world around these kind of, how do you measure difference in these types of system-wide interventions? So offer, I mean, again, same as with Anish, happy to chat. But I think the bigger thing would be connecting you with the right people. And you should meet Anish if you haven't already, who just presented before you, among others. So.
Hey,
Yes.
hey, Jennifer, this is Nate, and I just first want to say just a couple of things. Really nice presentation. I just want to comment that you really kind of well thought out and well put together, and I really think it's actually a great idea. So that I just want to put that out there. What I would have to offer you, in PCARN, if drugs of abuse certainly happen in those younger than 18. We have a near real-time PCARN registry. It's actually called the PCARN Registry Project. We do a lot of data mining from there that's almost real time. Usually it's hypothesis generating for other research, but I'd be happy to kind of plug you in to that. I know you're likely looking at a population that obviously extends beyond 18, but in the adolescent population, we have a really good registry that could help you out.
Awesome, thank you.
And I'm happy to connect you with our informaticists. Part of that group presented at the plenary today with Ted Malikan, and are really looking at large systems around the country on identifying OUD or issues issues, anything. And then Andrew Taylor here is also an informaticist who's looking at phenotyping. It's really complicated. I don't know how to do it, but it's a big deal, and I really would be excited to have you talk to them and see if there's something that you could fit, because they do have really large systems they're looking at. And we're doing it right now in multiple EDs, 2 projects. So you'd have the ability to maybe get into that space.
Awesome, thank you.
Jen, I'll throw in and say that number one, I'm an open conflict, and she's joining us in a couple months. So I'll lead off by saying, how about, do you want to come work here? I'll offer you that. And then the number 2 and number 3 are the more interesting ones, which is there's a new Department of Healthcare Artificial Intelligence that is sort of taking 4 floors above us, pulling from all the resources across the institution, and obviously recruiting broadly. And so connections to that once you arrive will be great. And the second one is right before I left the government, December, January-ish of 2020, the White House pulled together the DEA, the FDA, and Health and Human Services, and said, you guys, your data sets don't talk to each other, and they need to, because people are making arrests, people are overdosing. And I don't have absolutely no idea what that, I have not thought about those 3 meetings for the last 14 months, but I still know all the people, and it would be very fun to sort of reach out to them and find out where that conversation went, if they're going to dust that off now that there's a little bit of bandwidth.
Awesome, thanks.
Sorry
Everyone.
to interrupt you all, but we got to jump on to the next one. Thanks so much, Jen. Beatrice, I think you are on now. I have seen somewhere. If so, if you can get your slides up. If not, we can skip order and do Kenny first. Is Beatrice here? Yep, great, awesome. Floor is yours.
Can you guys hear me now?
Now we can.
Oh,
Yep.
okay, sorry. It's always something. My apologies. So I'm excited to be here today to present a grant that we've currently submitted to EMF and that is pending. and it's called the feasibility study of ultrasound elastography, which is in this case RFE technology, to study them in healthy and diseased lungs, including COVID patients. And here are my 5 slides for you. So what will this project address? And I kind of shaped it a little bit like the email we got with the questions we had. And what this project addresses basically in a nutshell is that we use a lot of lung imaging for diseased lungs, but those imaging studies give us maybe an idea of what the pathology is, but they don't give us really anything on lung compliance or elasticity. And this is where this research idea comes in. And so the problem is that we have these studies, but we have maybe high sensitivities, but usually fairly low specificities with these imaging tests. And it became especially apparent again last year around COVID, when we discovered that there are several types of COVID pneumonias. They have different elasticity and compliance characteristics. So this is when this idea was born. So what could be a solution to this problem? And in my mind, of course, I've been doing ultrasound for many, many years. And of course, I started when I was very little, so I'm a fairly youngster. But there is a new ultrasound modality. So when I say modality, Doppler is a modality, elastography is just one modality that is actually not that new, but for North America, it is fairly new. And that looks at elasticity of tissue with ultrasound technology. And what this technology has shown in studies, liver, thyroid, soft tissue areas, is that it actually very specific and very predictive of what type of pathology it can detect. And you guys have to imagine it almost as like an extra kind of impulse that is sent, and it is fairly operator independent. And it really shows the stiffness and the stretchiness of the tissue, and literally puts labels or numbers on liver cancer, thyroid cancer, or nodules, benign, non-benign. And it has been shown in some preliminary studies that it actually can also do it for the lung. But there is not much out there. So the good news is it's fairly new. There is not really much information about the lung, and we really need it for the lung, obviously. But the bad news is it is really new. We don't really have any baseline characteristics, and we need to start from scratch. So here's my proposal. Basically, I just summarized the 3 aims I proposed, or we proposed. And first, to establish RFE baseline parameters for healthy lungs, and then a disease, for instance, CHF, that is more kind of general for the lung. The lung is not a very homogenic organ, but CHF usually goes left, right, up, down. And then to have a test subject group for lobar pneumonia, and then collect in a certain amount of patients baseline data in certain areas of lung, like anatomical lung area. And obviously we will use like established, validated lung ultrasound kind of strategies for that, and also compare it with B-mode and with other conventional imaging. Second aim, of course, would be to enroll COVID patients, because that's kind of a type of a very inhomogenic interstitial pneumonia type of picture that behaves in a very kind of spectrum way, and collect data and correlate that with their clinical behavior. And the third step would be to follow those COVID patients, because elasticity changes, compliance of lung changes with disease emergence or severity or resolution, and then see if there's actually predictive potential, for instance, to establish rules for treatment. Is this a more or less compliant lung? Does that lung would need early steroids, for instance? Is this on a pathway to become highly elastic or less elastic? So that would be aim 3. And so why will this project succeed? So here's the lines then. You guys said it used to be the Shark Tank. And I watched the series to see how they pitch. So the pitch is...
Yeah, just wrap it up here, because you are at 5 minutes, so make sure to wrap
the
up.
pitch is, it works. We have baseline data. We have research machinery. We have trained personnel. We have the patient population. It has legs. There are many possibilities how to spread this project out once the baseline data is there and the network or the framework is there. And why I'm here, I do think everybody who has a pending EMF grant should be here and get advice or get improvement and additional input to add scientific value and to get probably guidance specifically is for NIH funding, when to go for this, which type of grant is there, equipment grant, for instance. So questions? Jonas?
So I'll kick it off. So I guess the thing I'm not clear of is what problem is this going to solve for the average emergency physician, right? So, so for me, I think that's the piece that needs to be really clear in my mind is here is the space that needs to be addressed, and this is where this technology, particularly if you say that we know the technology works and stuff, here's how it's going to work. And so whether it's an EMF grant, whether it is just here, that's the piece that I guess is not totally clear in my mind at this point.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. I think when you see a patient in the emergency department with a respiratory complaint, we are relying on imaging that is not very specific, right? So imaging right now, we use it, but chest x-ray, for instance, if you make the diagnosis of chest x-ray, if you look at, for instance, pneumonia guidelines, you don't have to have actually a positive chest x-ray to be able to make that diagnosis. So we are using current modalities that are not telling us a lot of lung function. So here would be, for instance, one of my arguments to counter that. It's bedside, it's repeatable, it's not radiating. It's fairly operator independent.
So Beatrice, thank you. There's some funding mechanisms already that's going on. It's by one of the federal agencies, like part of DOD or whatever, that's working with some of the companies actually and spreading that out in terms of how to look at lung issues with COVID, et cetera. The only thing I think you're going to have problems with is this mechanism is really only on really large machines. It's not really around for all the portable new technology. And so I wonder about its generalizability, but you could talk to some of those companies that are generating those butterflies and everything else, because this would be an added ask for a lot of places. So I just wondered if you thought about that.
I think many of the ultrasound companies have that functionality. It is not yet in our way of point of care ultrasound, but it's a matter of technology. It's a matter of time. I think that it's a software package upload or an upgrade of a machine you can actually make. So most companies, probably with the exception of companies that only focus in the true handheld market, have that technology already available. It's just a matter of bringing it out there and testing it, as nobody has tested it on the lung.
Beatrice, this is Nate. I might have missed this, but are you using machine learning AI incorporated in this or not?
No, there's no AI necessary.
So one thing that I would suggest is, because there's a big movement in the ultrasonography world, and I don't need to probably tell you because you're more experienced than I am, but to make this, to Manisha's point, making this useful for the bedside clinician, if there were AI machine learning incorporated so that it decreases the amount of expertise needed by the person doing the ultrasound, I think that would add just an octave of improvement to the bedside clinician. So I would just think about adding AI machine learning to the pitch that you will eventually make to the NIH or wherever else that you'll go.
I love that, Nate. I actually want to add on to that of if you can quantify, right? So rather than this just being another tool, like that quantification of the particular elements that correlate with this being pneumonia, There's a whole field in EEG, for instance, around quantified EEGs rather than just reading the spikes the way that our neurology colleagues used to do, that allows it to be more reproducible and also used by folks who are less specialized in their training in resource poor settings, et cetera. And so going off of kind of others' points, I do wonder if that might be the direction. And then from my kind of entrepreneurship perspective, I just want to second the suggestion around trying to create liaisons with folks like Butterfly around this. Because again, I see this as having tremendous utility in a resource poor setting, less so in my ED, where at least theoretically, I can get a chest x-ray relatively quickly, although some days less quickly than others.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much, folks. We have to move on to our last. It looks like, in case you missed him in the chat, Beatrice, Nate has suggested a potential connection who maybe, if you want the help or need, he could help with an intro with, and Brendan's post some thoughts as well. So make sure to check that chat. Thanks so much. And Kenny, we've got you up last.
All right, everybody can hear me? Success? All right, good. My name is Kenny McKinley. I'm a pediatric emergency medicine doctor with a research focus in predictive analytics. I'm excited to present my proposal, Prediction of Bacteremia Risk in Febrile Children with Sickle Cell Disease. During my fellowship at Columbia, I learned how to apply computer simulation models to clinical and operational problems. My most recent project at Children's National involved the creation of a Monte Carlo simulation to predict our utilization of personal protective equipment during the pandemic. That's pictured here. Since I arrived at Children's National, I've decided that computer simulation models are indeed powerful, but that's not all I want to do when I grow up. For any patient we see in the emergency department, we quickly gather clinical data, we interpret these data to determine the risk of one or more treatable conditions, and then we make a clinical decision based on that interpretation. My overall career goal is to use data science methods to improve risk prediction and clinical decision-making for high-stakes pediatric conditions, such as sickle cell disease. This is an evolution in my career goals, and it's already been extremely gratifying because there's now a real dialogue between my clinical work and my research. Just yesterday, I spent an hour on the phone with the mother of a recent sickle cell patient that I'd treated for fever. When she came to the ED last month, she initially refused antibiotics for her son, stating he's never actually sick, he never actually has an infection. And although she agreed to ceftriaxone, his blood culture was negative and he's been doing well ever since. So she was right, but this is still a high-risk population, and we don't have the tools to identify which children are at very low risk of bacteremia, even if they don't look sick. Our current practice of blood culture and empiric antibiotics is based on guidelines established in the 1980s, when mortality and the rate of bacteremia were much higher in children with sickle cell disease. That was before the advent of conjugate vaccines and widespread use of prophylactic penicillin. In recent years at our center, ED providers have followed guidelines and collected a blood culture for the vast majority of febrile children with sickle cell disease, but only 1.6% of them were found to have bacteremia. Empiric broad-spectrum antibiotics, also recommended by the guidelines, were given to nearly all patients with a blood culture. Just over half were then discharged home. Evaluating the performance of current clinical practice, the decision to deliver antibiotics is 97% sensitive for bacteremia. However, lacking effective tools to stratify risk, most children with a negative blood culture were exposed to broad-spectrum antibiotics, indicating poor specificity, just 3.4% for the clinical decision to give antibiotics. Therefore, there is a critical need to improve risk stratification and decision-making around antibiotic use for this population. I believe machine learning can revolutionize the way we make clinical decisions about febrile children with sickle cell disease and could eventually help safely limit repeated exposure to broad-spectrum antibiotics in this high-risk population. My proposal has evolved somewhat since I applied for an EMF Early Career Research Development Grant, mostly in that a third specific aim has started to take shape. My aims include SAEM21, identify febrile children with sickle cell disease at risk for bacteremia by applying machine learning to single-visit clinical data. SAEM2, identify febrile children with sickle cell disease with at risk of bacteremia using a longitudinal model, which incorporates prior vital sign as well as diagnostic testing data where available, and SPEC-AIM-3, which is a feasibility aim to explore the use of wearable technology to further augment our ability for risk prediction modeling. Using the specific aims of my current proposal as a foundation, I will refine and externally validate the models I developed in this proposal in the following 3 to 5 years. Subsequently, I will implement clinical decision support to improve clinical care for febrile children with sickle cell disease. And then I will apply these strategies to other uncommon, high-stakes pediatric conditions. I've already put together an extremely capable team of mentors and advisors for my current proposal, and I'm very grateful for their help. Now I look forward to working with new mentors as my proposal develops, as I refine my models, and as I move toward future efforts, including prospective validation, implementation of clinical decision support, and possibly predictive analytics for patient-centered outcomes research. So I'm very excited and happy to answer some questions.
So Kenneth, this is Nate, and I've been the anointed first person because I'm the PZM crew person on the Lions Den. But of course, if you listen to my keynote, I'm a big fan of general EM physicians participating in PEDS research, which they have been doing to a great degree. But let me just, a couple of quick comments. I love the idea because this is very typical of pediatrics. This is low frequency, high risk disease. So we need to figure out how to capture those. So this has to be a very high sensitivity model. But again, you're aiming for also high specificity because you don't want to expose all these kids to antibiotics. So let me just make 2 questions because again, my colleagues will also have some important comments. So I just, so you know, I am a big believer in AI machine learning. I've done some modeling around head injury. One thing that you need to know, you probably know this already with your experience, you know, I've seen machine learning models on the same topic, and one says it's not helpful over traditional techniques, and another says it does. So, you know, machine learning, as you know, is just not one bucket. It's you got to find the right team and make sure that you're doing it right, because it can lead to different answers depending on the algorithms that you use. The other thing that I was just going to mention, and you've got really good mentors already there, but you want to incorporate how the patient looks. And unfortunately, a retrospective database will never do that for you, because what is documented in the registry, in the database, let's be honest, the way we document is we document after we've seen the kid and we've already seen their sort of outcome by the time we get to the medical record and input the data. So this is something that I wouldn't validate a retrospective thing. I would conduct this prospectively, and and I'm not even pushing it to PCARN, I'm pushing it to the Peds Emergency Medicine Collaborative Research Committee of the Academy of Pediatrics. It's a great group of people who are, you know, very invested in collaborative research, because my main issue with the registries are that you cannot capture the appearance. And anything that we do, we want to look at the marginal benefit of the technologies that we're using that are above and beyond our clinical judgment to really you know, make this real and get clinicians to buy in. So I would do that. And then secondly, I would just say with the machine learning, we all know, you know, it's very powerful, but it's very black box to clinicians, and clinicians don't really like black box. So you're going to have to, whatever you develop, you're going to have to make it sort of intuitive for clinicians to imply. But I really love the idea, and I'm happy to participate and offer advice however you need.
I'm going to jump onto it from the informatics side. Send me an email after this, because we're doing a lot of stuff like this, not obviously with fever and sickle cell, but with older adults. One of my mentees is very heavily in it and has a fair amount of funding around it. One of the key things here is you need to have this stuff occurring real time, right? So a lot of these machine learning models end up being these things of, you know, you download the stuff, you clean the data, you process the data, and then, you know, eventually you get something. And it takes a little bit of finesse to set it up, particularly depending on which EHR system you have, to have it run immediately. But it's very possible, and this is where machine learning, I think, is really going to help us a lot going forward.
Yeah, just to respond to both of those, I do think that there's a lot of value in starting with prospective data gathering. The only real advantage of using retrospective registry, and I can either use our emergency department registry at Children's National, where we have almost 5,000 visits, but not a whole lot of true positives. Or we're just getting plugged in with Cerner real world data here at Children's National, which has at least triple that number of patients, and might be more realistic for some of the machine learning objectives I have. Developing models that don't have access to the important variable of how does the patient look, if they still improve on specificity better than 3.4% and are able to maintain sensitivity at an extremely high level, that's not ready to roll out to Epic and Cerner and say, plug this in with your EHR and start predicting the risk of bacteremia for clinicians in the real world. But it gives us buy-in for a prospective study, and a prospective study could involve prospective validation of the model I've developed. It could involve prospective inclusion of a new variable, patient appearance, and concatenate that with the model I developed with retrospective data. Or it could just be a stepping stone saying, we can do better with crummy data. Give me money to get real good data, and we're going to do a lot better, and we're going to save a lot of these patients from unnecessary antibiotic exposure. So that's the mental model I have for where can I get started, because I have the data and I have the ability and capability of querying at least our institutional data, and hopefully soon multi-institutional. I will email you, Manish. Thank you for that offer.
I apologize that we're running over time. It looks like we need to be heading out of this room. Kenny, before we do, there's a couple comments. So look in the comments there, one from Meg Rainey. True, as Nate says, we'll never convince clinicians to withhold antibiotics from ill-appearing patients, for sure. But check out the comments there and capture them before we end this. This has been recorded if you want to get any of the comments later to look at them again. But thank you so much, all of you, for participation, for the presenters, for the Lions. Not quite as fun as in person, but actually better than I thought in Zoom. It's really great to see you all and to have this conversation. So thank you all for your participation today.
Nice work, everyone.
Really is great work.
Thank you all.
Soon.
Good to see everybody.
Amazing job, everybody.
All right.